Thank you, Ms. Wallace. The defense?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here and for your willingness to serve. The prosecutor just got up here and told you about a horrific tragedy. A tragedy caused by crimes that are horrifying and devastating and heart-wrenching. They're unspeakable. There's no words. In fact, no one should ever have to find the words to speak about something like this, because something like this should have never happened. It's heartbreaking. Some of you might be looking at me and wondering, how is she going to defend that? What can she do to defend against such awful crimes? How can she, or anyone for that matter, defend what happened here? And if you are thinking that, that's a reasonable question to have. So I want to be so incredibly clear. I am not here to defend what happened. I am not here to defend against those crimes. I am not here to defend a tragedy. I am here to defend Paul Caneiro. Because Paul Caneiro did not do this. He did not commit these crimes. He did not hurt anyone. He did not harm anyone. He did not set any house on fire. And he certainly did not brutally murder the family members that you will hear he loved and cherished and adored so much. Paul Caneiro is innocent. Now, we recognize that there's a lot of evidence in this case. We recognize that the prosecutor just got up here, and when she told you all about it, it sounds like a lot of evidence. And it sounds bad. We get it. But ladies and gentlemen, that does not mean that they're correct. It does not mean that they're right. Everything that the prosecutor just got up here and told you, the defendant this, the defendant that, the defendant this, the defendant that, that's a theory. When the prosecutor just got up here and she told you this whole story about everything that they think the evidence will show and what they think Paul Caneiro did and why they think he did it and what they think his motivations were, that's a theory. And it's a theory that they developed very early on in this investigation. A theory that the state wants you to believe makes sense. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show that their theory does not make sense. They want you to believe that Paul Caneiro went to his brother's home, committed these crimes in cold snap, came home, plopped all the evidence down, and then lit his own house on fire so that all of the police and all of the fire personnel and the investigators and the fire marshals and the detectives could come there and find it. How convenient. The fact that the evidence in this case appears to be so conveniently overwhelming, is the very reason why you should call into question their theory. And this is a theory that they came up with very early on in the investigation. The evidence will show, and you'll hear that the police, law enforcement, they focused on Paul Caneiro immediately, and to the incredible exclusion of anyone else. From the moment police began investigating this case, they directed their attention at Paul Caneiro, and they remained fixated on him ever since. They did not investigate anyone else. They did not investigate any other suspects, even obvious ones. And they searched for evidence to support their theory. They ignored things that didn't make sense. They ignored things that did not add up. They ignored things that did not fit with their theory. And that's dangerous. Because when the police, when law enforcement, when they decide on a suspect first, and then they build a case around that decision, a rush to judgment happens. Tunnel vision happens. Blinders happen. Confirmation bias happens. And that's troubling. It's very troubling. Because not everyone who is accused of a crime is guilty. Not everyone who is arrested and charged with a crime is guilty. Not everyone who sits in this chair is guilty. Even in a murder case. Even in a tragic case. So when the state wants you to believe, again, this theory that Mr. Caneiro committed these crimes and then drew everyone to his own home to find all of this evidence. DNA and bloody clothes in his basement, gun accessories in his bag, his cars being used, his guns being used, a gas can supposedly of his is being used and left right on the front lawn for all of law enforcement to find when they get there. By the way, when they got there, they immediately, almost immediately, set up a crime scene because it was so obvious. So obvious. Doesn't make sense. Now, the fact that the state decided on Paul Caneiro, the fact that they decided to accuse and arrest and charge Paul Caneiro, that does not mean that he did this. Sometimes the police are wrong. Now, who should the police have focused on? Who should they have investigated? Well, they didn't really mention him, but there's a third brother. And his name is Corey Caneiro. And you heard about this trust. The trust held a life insurance policy. And that life insurance policy by Canada Life was worth $3 million, as they mentioned. They told you that. What they didn't tell you is that the terms of the trust were such that in the event, God forbid, something happened to Keith and his family, that $3 million would get divided. $1.5 million would go to Paul Caneiro, and the other $1.5 million would go to Corey Caneiro. And this is part of the same exact motive that the state alleges that Paul had. Now, you also heard that Paul's financial situation was a house of cards. But what you also hear during this trial is that Corey Caneiro's financial situation was even worse. You'll hear they told you Paul Caneiro was on disability. He made a significant amount of money on that disability. He was not worried. They also told you about this $78,000. A lot was made about the trust. There's a trust account and money was taken. You'll learn that they allege it totaled $78,000. We're going to address that during the course of this trial. But let me just say this now. You will learn that there is no world in which Paul would murder his own brother Keith, let alone his family, including his baby niece and nephew, over that money, over $78,000. And we recognize that to some, that's a lot of money. But to Keith and to Paul, longtime business partners who had made a lot of money over the course of years, that was not a lot of money. And even if it was, it would still never serve as a motive for him to murder his family. You're going to hear that not only did Paul Caneiro have a significant amount of money coming in each month, I think it's over $200,000 you'll hear a year in disability, but they told you that there was a potential sale of one of their companies in the works. And they told you that they were working on selling it. And you'll hear that was also going to sell for a significant amount of money. A significant amount of money. Paul was not worried about money. And you'll learn that that motive is just absurd. Because you're going to learn that Paul and his brother Keith, they loved each other very much. They weren't just long-term business partners. They were lifelong brothers, 1 year apart, their entire lives. And they weren't just brothers, they were best friends. You're going to hear from people who knew them that how close they were, that they were each other's person. You're going to hear that when Paul talked about his brother, when he talked about his brother to anyone that knew them, that was his favorite person in the whole world. And those kids, Jesse and Sophia, he loved them like they were his own children. And the people that know them know he would never hurt them. You're going to hear that Keith's family and Paul's family, they were so close that they actually considered themselves one big family instead of two separate families. What you're also going to hear is that Corey Caneiro was on the outside of that. He wasn't a part of that. He wasn't a part of the businesses, and he wasn't a part of that close relationship. He was on the outside. But they never investigated Corey. They never looked into Corey. They never did a single thing to investigate Corey. Not a single thing. They searched Paul's house, and they searched Keith's house. They never searched Corey's house. They searched Paul's phone and his electronic devices, and Keith's. They never searched Corey's. They got surveillance video from the area of Paul's house, the same way they did for Keith. They never did that for Corey. And they took and they tested Paul's DNA the same way they did Keith, Jennifer, Sophia, and Jesse's. But they never even bothered to get Corey Caneiro's DNA. And you know why that matters, ladies and gentlemen? When you have the opportunity to hear from the testimony of the DNA experts in this case, you will understand why that matters so much in this case. Because in this case, we're dealing with family members who you can imagine have very similar DNA profiles, not strangers. And what they also didn't mention is that a lot of the DNA in this case, it's not the traditional DNA matching that you might be familiar with. They used a specific software. It's called STR or StarMix. You're going to learn about it. And StarMix doesn't match DNA like you might be thinking of. What it does is it takes convoluted DNA mixtures and it uses mathematical algorithms. It's a probabilistic genotype software, and it comes up with these likelihood ratios. There's a certain likelihood, it's X likely, that the mixture contains a person's DNA. And so they're going to tell you that. The experts will testify it's X likely that Paul's DNA is in this mixture. You know what we don't know? What you'll never know in this case, because they didn't do it, is how likely it is that Corey's DNA is in that mixture. And more importantly, whether that's more likely or less likely that it's Paul's. And there's other reasons why the DNA in this case isn't as powerful as it seems, and you're going to learn about that, I promise. In fact, you're going to learn a lot about why the facts that they allege aren't what they appear. And I would love to go through all of them with you now, but it would take forever. And as you know, it's a 5, 6 week, 7 week trial. So I promise you, we will go through it. You will learn during the course of this trial why the facts that they allege are not what they seem. So, I also want you to pay close attention to the evidence in this case as it's presented. I ask that you pay very close attention to the evidence and the lack of evidence. I ask that you pay close attention to the incredible lack of investigation that was done in this case, especially as it relates to Corey Caneiro. And they want you to follow the evidence. They want you to follow the money. Well, so do we. Because when it comes to the $3 million that was at stake, what you'll learn is it doesn't lead you to Paul. It leads you directly to Corey. That's what you'll learn. Now, they never considered this information. They never considered whether Paul Caneiro actually had a motive to murder his family. And they never considered whether someone else did. And they certainly never considered whether the police were intentionally and deliberately led to believe that Paul was responsible. We did not have an open mind. But ladies and gentlemen, I know that you will. That's why we have a trial. That's why we're here. And that's why we have a jury. And most significantly, very significantly, the presumption of innocence. The presumption of innocence protects all people from a rush to judgment. It protects every citizen from the dangers of assuming, and it protects each and every one of us from the potential of a wrongful conviction. Now, we've all heard of the presumption of innocence. We've all heard of the idea of the presumption of innocence. It wasn't until I heard a story that truly highlighted for me the power, how powerful that presumption is. The story is this. There was a trial. It was a murder case, and it was over 30 years ago, but coincidentally, it was in Monmouth County in this courthouse. And the judge, during the jury selection process, did something very similar to what all of you experienced. He put all the jurors in the box, and he started asking questions. And he said, juror number 1, I want you to take a look at this man, the accused, sitting in this chair. And I want you to tell me, is he guilty or is he innocent? Juror number 1 said, well, I haven't heard any of the evidence yet. I don't know, I can't say. And the judge said, thank you, juror number 1, you're excused. The judge moved on to juror number 2 and said, juror number 2, same question. I want you to look at this man sitting in that chair, and I want you to tell me, is he guilty or is he innocent? Juror number 2 thought for a few moments and then said, well, Your Honor, I've been paying very close attention to your instructions. I've been listening carefully, and I know that I'm supposed to keep an open mind, and I will, but I also know I'm not supposed to make a decision until we deliberate at the end of the case. So I haven't decided yet. I don't know. And the judge said, juror number 2, thank you, you're excused. And at that point, when I'm listening to the story, I'm also confused, because I thought that was a good answer. I thought I'd like that juror on my jury. It's a very conscientious response. But the judge had moved on to juror number 3. It says, juror number 3, same question. I want you to look at this man and tell me, is he guilty or is he innocent? And juror number 3 said, he's innocent. And the judge said, thank you, juror number 3. Please take juror number 1 seat. You are now juror number 1. Because that is the power of the presumption of innocence. It's that Mr. Caneiro, as he sits here now, as he sits here today, he's innocent. He is an innocent man. That is the presumption. That's the starting point. That's where we begin. Today, tomorrow, the day after, the next day, the day after that, he's innocent. And he remains innocent. Unless and until the state can prove its case. Unless and until they can meet their burden. And that's your oath. To preserve, to protect, to honor that presumption. Unless and until they can prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a very high standard, and there's a reason for that, and I'll talk about that when I talk to you again at the end of the case. But I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, they will not be able to meet that burden in this case. I submit to you that there will be reasons to doubt at the end of this trial. There will be reasons to doubt. I understand this is a tragic case. We know that the allegations are harrowing and beyond comprehension. But that doesn't mean that they're right. Because sometimes the police get it wrong. Sometimes the state gets it wrong. And it is not impossible for the state to be wrong. Not even in a murder case. Not even in a tragic case. And especially in this case. So at the end of this trial, I will ask that you find Mr. Caneiro